Hi, everybody. Welcome to our very first episode of the morning show on philanthropy and social change. We're so excited to be here with you today. And for our first episode, we have a fabulous, really inspiring guest, Eve Rodsky. Eve, I had the immense pleasure of meeting you a few weeks ago, where we participated in a really powerful conversation at the School World Forum around what is fundamentally broken with philanthropy today and the unprecedented opportunity we have to do philanthropy so much better. And I know that you've had a front row seat to so much of this for the past decade as the founder of the Philanthropy Advisory Group. And you took your journey in a really exciting direction with your latest best-selling book, Fair Play, and this very powerful platform that you built with Reese Witherspoon's company, Hello Sunshine, that's advocating for an issue here at home that is actually connected to all of this. So Eve, maybe tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think the beauty of having a philanthropic background, which is what I think we'll talk a lot about today, is that my particular practice was in succession. So I'm a lawyer by trade. I work for families that look like the HBO show Succession. Everyone should feel bad for me because we all know those families. But what I do for them, what my niche practice has become, or niche practice, however you want to say it, is I bring grace and humor and generosity to these family foundations and family businesses when they're having their most difficult organizational financial decisions, when they have to make very difficult decisions. Now, organizations have to make difficult decisions everywhere. But when you have an overlay of family on top of these decisions, it's very layered. It's very interesting. And so my background in law, in tax, organizational management, economics, anthropology, all of these things sort of gelled together in this very interesting philanthropic advising practice that I've had for a decade. But really, on top of that, looking at my training in organizational management and starting to ask the most important question I've asked in 10 years, which is, what would happen if we treated our homes as our most important organizations?
I've just read a lot of things that you've been writing. And of course, I follow all of your posts on Instagram. And there was something you said even last week that just really hit home, which is that we can't achieve gender equality if men do not do housework. Just even looking at how this impacted women in an unprecedented way, even in December, right? 100% of unemployment was all women. So you've hit on a topic that is so important. And what really also enlightened my perspective was in the context of that conversation at the School World Forum, where you said, if we don't fix this, then we can't increase women's participation in the labor force. And so then we can't increase women's wealth. We can't increase their participation in leadership and really shaping decision-making across all industries. And if we can't do that, then that ties all the way up to philanthropy and impact investing and helping the world. Why? Because we know that women are phenomenal leaders, right? I mean, the data shows this from so many different perspectives. We know that they are also extremely powerful philanthropists. Mackenzie Scott, really shined a light on that last year. And so this is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed. And, I take it back to something that you shared in the context of our conversation as we were distilling this all the way back to what is wrong with philanthropy. And you started talking about the dirty little secrets of philanthropy. I will forever steal that line from you. It's so good. But it's so important because it goes with something that we've been talking a lot about in many of the circles or the ecosystem that's involved in philanthropy, which is that philanthropy is going to have a reckoning. I mean, 2020 opened the cracks, right? We've looked at the cracks with a magnifying glass. We see what is fundamentally broken in the system. Something that I think about is, just last year, billionaires added $1.9 billion to their wealth. We know that it's going to cost somewhere north of $4 trillion to get the planet back on a sustainable trajectory. And yet, in the middle of all of this, we're still talking about $1 million restricted grants that are not enabling organizations that have a phenomenal track record to unleash their potential to do good. And so the system's broken. And from your perspective, I would love for you to share with the audience here today what those dirty little secrets of philanthropy are, but really with the vision of, why is philanthropy broken? How is it broken? Like, how did we get here?
That's a great question. I think it's a big one we can unpack together, Alix. The first one I want to share, maybe I'll do two, and then we can unpack them and talk about others that we talked about as well on the
Yeah.
Skull Forum. But I think the number one dirty little secret is what I call legacy washing. I just made up that term. Obviously, there's a lot of different types of washing we do. But I think the legacy washing has always been really interesting to me. And what I mean by that is I really truly believe, and I tell this to my kids as part of my values. It's actually a part of Judaism that we really think about the here and now and not the afterlife. And so in my value system and what I impart to my kids is that you want to create an active legacy, right? You don't want to legacy wash yourself upon death. You want to live the values that you want people to speak about you at the end of your life. And so to do that, we have to really live a life of intention. But when you think about philanthropists or even the most famous philanthropists, I think the biggest irony is that a lot of philanthropy is legacy washing. And so I'll talk about the origins of that all the way to the current times. But I think the most probably famous example would be Alfred Nobel. And the biggest irony to me is that he's known for the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Peace Prize is probably the most famous one. And this is a man who created dynamite. He literally created dynamite. One of the most dangerous weapons known to man. And so I think a lot about that metaphor of the dynamite, right? That this man who created dynamite ended up being most well known for his Nobel Peace Prize. And so that type of, you can call it irony or you could call it hypocrisy, is the number one dirty little secret, because I see it all the time. I had a client who wanted to work for me that I turned down because his entire legacy was in oil and gas. And he wanted to create a foundation that worked in the Galapagos, saving endangered species. And again, dynamite and peace, oil and gas, your whole life creating that industry, giving away 5% to save endangered species in the Galapagos. It just doesn't match. But it does match if you think about legacy washing, where you are trying to atone for your sins in that way. And I don't think philanthropy should allow people to do that. I think that's the reckoning. We cannot allow people to atone for those types of sins in that way. And then I think just related, number two, dirty little secret is the fact that most people don't understand the way private foundations work. Private foundations are the vehicle in which most wealthy people in America hold their wealth. Not only do you get a tax deduction for that money, and you can use it in many, many ways to actually escape estate tax, but the dirty little secret is that 95% of that wealth can go, mostly goes unspent. And ironically, it goes into those oil and gas portfolios, and you can even invest it in your own company as long
Mhm.
as just a measly 5% is spent every year.
Yeah.
So we have wealth hoards sitting in private foundations that are not deployed. And then that money just grows and grows over time. It's a lot like endowments around schools, but even worse. And so I think there's a reckoning. I think there has to be also a reckoning on how we mandate foundations to give their money away.
It's so interesting to me, Eve, because in my experience, I mean, I've worked with philanthropists that range across, corporations, foundations, high net worth individuals, and there's so many different conversations that have taken place. And there are times when I've walked away from these conversations thinking, we are the problem. We either get in our own way or there's the wrong intention behind what we're trying to do, which really should all be in the context of helping people in emerging markets help themselves, and that means removing obstacle, creating a more even level playing field, inviting people at the table, giving up some of our power, right? So we are making room for leaders locally to take charge of their own future. And yet it's really not often the culture that is prevalent in philanthropy. Now, some of the great scenarios that I've encountered and that hit on some of the points that you're talking about have been when there has been a really great alignment of intention and legacy and how you're trying to make change in the world. And one of those funders, from the first meeting that we had, which of course was a woman, we were sitting at a coffee shop in LA, and I think I had just done, my goodness, 15 meetings in that week. And I sat down and she said, I've read all about the work of WADA.org. We are really here to help you. We believe in systemic change. Let's talk about how we can help you. And it was one of those great conversations where we could be creative and think big because our minds, our mindset was connected. And I think about that scenario a lot because 7 years later, this is a funder that has provided nearly $20 million in unrestricted funding that has fueled so much innovation and impact to address the global water crisis. And why can't that be the majority scenario with almost all philanthropists? Why is that so hard? And it's a conversation that we have to have. I mean, even, in light of so many of the announcements that were made by BlackRock around the importance of eliminating greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, we are never going to get there if we don't significantly do things differently and accelerate, our impact over the next decade. It's like 2030 is the new 2050. And it means adopting this mindset of how can we help? I mean, we have the resources. Let's do our due diligence on finding organizations that have figured it out, who can really create local ecosystems that are sustainable, that it really is about powering local entrepreneurs, helping women build their businesses. That has to be the force behind philanthropy. And that means, making significantly bigger grants. It goes with your comment about providing a mere 5%. The issues we're up against are trillion-dollar issues. And it's not just issues that are linked to philanthropy. These are issues linked to the world. I mean, if you're a global company operating in India, Indonesia, and Kenya, you have a vested interest in unleashing the power of local consumers. That's people living in poverty who need access to basic goods and services. If you don't address those issues, eventually you'll lose relevance, you'll lose market share, you'll lose employees. I mean, it goes all the way up, the supply chain. And the challenge is, how do we get this methodology, this mindset to be adopted across, all philanthropists? And it goes back to something that you shared at school, which is that, most of philanthropy does not go, in fact, to poverty. I believe that you shared, Eve, that 80% goes to alma maters and hospitals, right? Tell us a little bit
Yes.
more about
So
that.
that's dirty little secret three. And that 80% was of my clients over 10 years. When I
Right.
look back and saw. So, I have a big, I've had a big client base over 10 years. So I'm going to assume that it's not that different for if you look at it nationally. And I know that there are some stats and I can bring those back to you. But for my clients, people, I think the dirty little secret number 3 or 4, wherever we are, is how little power program officers, uh, philanthropic advisors actually have on living donors. So, yes, you have power over dead donors. And what I mean by that is if there is a legacy, usually if there's a foundation that, like, for example, the Ford Foundation, that's called a professional foundation, right? So, that type of foundation has professionals in charge. They're not run by a family board. So there you will see more thoughtful grant making because it's a professionalized job. But a lot of the organizations and the people that you, Alix, and I deal with are the matriarchs, the patriarchs, the first time generation, the cousins generation, where in the board is still families in charge of this money. And in that
Hmm.
philanthropy, and even, even in bigger organizations, it's typically with 1 or 2 or maybe 3 people who have the major decision making power over these entities that have billions and billions of dollars, that also have money that the IRS has invested in them and that taxpayers have invested in them because we've given a tax deduction, which means that we taxpayers have subsidized these entities. So I think it's really important to understand a little bit about the field. The field is
Hmm.
not uniform. There are professional foundations that you've heard of, like Gates and Ford, as we're talking to your audience. But as we know, Alix and I, that a lot of the money is still coming from family foundations, from single donors, AKA we saw what the Kochs were able to do. And that money is big, it's powerful. And most of it in the situations that I was working um, is not able to be influenced by me. They are decisions that are already pretty much set in stone by those 1, 2, 3 people. And
Right.
oftentimes they are decisions around the family's own medical issues or the family's alma maters.
Hmm.
And so there's not a lot of, as Isabel Wilkerson will call, radical empathy for thinking about really what's going on in the world and how do we want to help, as you
Yeah.
said. So I think
Yeah.
the reason why I get to be your inaugural guest and I'm so excited to be is because you and I have a very similar philosophy about how we start to shift philanthropy, and that is to look at it through a how can I help mindset where you trust the organization to do their best work. And of course, that doesn't mean you lose oversight, but it can mean that you work in partnership with them in large,
Mhm.
large scales that are much, much bigger than the way we're thinking today.
Exactly. And it brings me to a point of what are our metrics of success with philanthropy? So if I'm a philanthropist, here's what would be really exciting. I would want to know that whether I've got $500,000 in the bank or a million or 100 million, whatever my allocation is to be able to do good in the world, I would want to give that to an organization that, again, I've done my due diligence. I believe in what they're doing. I've looked at their business plan. I've done the homework to know that this is an organization that I trust. I donate to this organization and I want to see how my 1 million, for instance, can catalyze significantly more from the global financial markets where there's trillions of dollars waiting to make things happen. I want to know that as I'm catalyzing this amount of capital, that it's going towards an approach that is removing obstacles for people living in poverty. I know that you don't need me to go over to India or a country in Africa and save you. You are powerful. You know what you need. I just want to help in removing obstacles so that you can do all the things that you want to do. And as such, I know that I have the chance to reach significantly more people. And I'm also going to look at my impact, not necessarily by how many people I'm reaching, but I'm going to look at impact per dollar invested. Tell me the full story. And then thirdly, and this is the important one that I think you're going to get really excited about, Eve, I want to look about, I want to see how you are making transformation happen. And it may take you 10, 20, or 30 years. But if I'm willing, again, let's say now I have more resources, but let's say I can give you $50 to $100 million in seed capital. I want to see how you are creating an ecosystem where you eventually are giving up power, where you're stepping to the side and creating an environment where local women entrepreneurs have the capital to run and start their businesses, where they're running for office, where they're generating wealth, where we're going to continue to tell that story even when we're not present and working together. I want to see an ecosystem where we've disrupted, we played our part, and then we've eventually gotten ourselves out of business and the world is in a better place. And that is not a mindset, that is among mainstream philanthropy. And yet we are missing this opportunity, because if we were moving in that direction, so many of these huge issues we see in the world would not be happening. And the longer we wait, the more the cost goes higher, the more these issues get more complicated. If only philanthropy would see the potential of putting real seed capital behind organizations that are making that change happen, it could have huge ripple effects that would be beneficial. And I think where you will agree with me, Eve, is that women could do so much good in this effort.
That's why for me, what fair play ultimately is about, why would I care if men do more housework? Because what it does is it allows women to step into their full power in the world. And at the end of the day, the thing that motivates me is women's economic power. If we're going to center economic security for women, we can't just look at the band-aids, one-off band-aids, like a pay gap assessment. We have to look at how we view and value women's time in our society. And when we treat it like sand, like it's worthless and infinite, but we guard men's time like it's finite, like it's diamonds, that leads ultimately to these inequities that continue to be perpetuated generation after generation.
It's been very enlightening to connect all these dots around the role that women play, the inequalities that they face, tracing that all the way back to how that starts at home and the responsibilities that they have, and how, not fixing this is going to continue to have, really profound impacts on our society. We are sharing something very bold, which is that, look, the world has never had this level of capital resources. We've never had this level of data that just further highlights the tremendous value that women contribute to society. And we've never had this level of progress among, social entrepreneurs and enterprises who have really addressed these big global issues head on. Why can't these worlds meet each other? Why can't we solve these issues in a way where men do housework, women generate more wealth, they lead institutions with that empathetic mindset and that understanding that, hey, our role here is to help and to listen and to provide capital in a way where we are not creating unnecessary control, and restrictions that is really getting in the way of making progress happen. And in light of everything that we've talked about, what would you do to solve these issues and maybe make this scenario become a reality?
What would I do? Well, I think The first thing I would do is, and this ties to the last dirty little secret we'll talk about today, which is that funders, philanthropists are scared of the word advocacy. And
Mhm.
advocacy is the most important word that we can use anywhere to make change, from grassroots to grass tops to our laws. Now, I'm a lawyer, so you may call me biased, but how do you design societies? That's how I look at things. I look at how do we design societies for more equity, for more fairness, for justice. So my unlimited resources would go to complete voter access. It would go to having the most voices in our democratic process. It would make the U.S. a world leader in that, and it would invest in advocacy as a tool for behavior design. And I think it's really important to recognize that people in power use the law in a way that is very important for power and control. And so
Mhm.
my unlimited resources would go to educating the population about civics, and it would go to voter access. That's it. That who makes decisions, who has the power. That's how we see transformative change. And so I think we're both working towards that. And I'm really excited. I'm excited for your new consultancy. I'm excited to see who your clients will become, because I think they're going to be the people in the world who are going to unleash this transformative change.
Thank you so much, Eve. And you will have a front row seat. So,
Great.
on
I'm
that
not.
note, you have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.